Hello and welcome to another edition of IHCP Live. My name is Michael Cook, and today we'll be presenting our next Town Hall Forum on electronic visit verification implementation. Now, just a quick heads up, we did a town hall about 2 or 3 weeks ago, so we're going to be repeating much of the same content, but if you missed it the last time, this will be a great presentation to give you a high-level overview of some key problems that we've seen providers run into, as well as how to avoid those problems. And we'll also offer time at the end if you have additional questions that you'd like to pose. But the reason we're doing this town hall today, to give you some context, is as a result of BT 2023-145. This bulletin announced our full enforcement of EVV for personal care services. So claims that were processed between November 15th and December 15th of this year will now be temporarily turned on and enforced for EVV implementation. This edit will actually be turned off on December 16th and will finally be turned back on sometime in April 2024. We've yet to announce the final date, but definitely watch out for IHCP publications for the final date to be announced. I do want to make sure to clarify that this is specifically for personal care services providers. EVV for home health remains in post and pay until later in 2024. And again, that will be announced through an IHCP publication. So we're going to begin by going over some very high-level common issues that are specific to SAN data, and then we'll get into some deeper issues that apply to both state-sponsored solution users as well as alternative vendor users. One of the most difficult issues that we ran into early on in implementation with our providers is around providers getting locked out from the SAN data portal. So we wanted to give providers just a few key tips and reminders about logging in. First off, we encourage providers to leave the STX in place when you're logging in. You want to use the Remember Me feature for retention of both the STX number and your username. And when you get to the all-important password section, definitely use the eyeball feature to ensure your password is correct. Now, the reason we emphasize that is after 2 failed login attempts, if you try to use the password again and you get it incorrect, you'll be locked out of your account and you'll have to contact either your agency administrator or Gainwell Technologies to get the account opened up. So if you get 2 failed login attempts, definitely use the forgot password feature. They'll get you a temporary password emailed to you, and you can get a new password created that way. When you're in SAN Data System, you're asked to upload all the information about the individuals that you're serving. So on this screen, we're just capturing a few key fields around capturing basic client information. And we want to pay extra close attention to the payer box to make sure that you've selected the correct payer for the services. Now, for personal care services today, this is pretty straightforward in that the only payer is INFSSA. However, in the future, when we get to 2024, with our Indiana Pathways for Aging program, some providers will be impacted by additional MCEs that they'll have to select from, as well as home health providers who will also have our MCE partners to choose from. So you definitely want to make sure that when you're adding a member to the system, make sure you're selecting the correct payer so that the information lines up correctly. In addition, make sure that you're spanning the start and stop date. Don't just select one date. You want to make sure that it's a span date so that, again, those EVV records can link up to the correct member. You'll then be asked to include a client address and phone number. And a couple key tips here. Remember that if the client has more than one address where they receive services, you want to go ahead and add each additional address to the record. And the same goes for the phone number. If that person happens to have multiple phone numbers that they use for one reason or another, you can go ahead and add each phone number to the client's record. The address is really important, and I think this question might have come up previously. If you are providing services to a member that receives services at alternative locations other than their home, and that location is fairly consistent, that you would expect that person's going to receive services from that alternative location, you absolutely want to include that alternative location on the client's profile. If it's a case where a person is receiving services in a temporary location outside of their home, you don't have to include that address on the member's profile. Again, really save that for the locations that they're consistently using. But if you do provide services to a temporary location that's different from the member's address on their EVV profile, you'll just need to be prepared to clear an exception if you're using GPS and it's capturing a different location than what's on file with the EVV, with the member's record. So just keep that detail in mind. Now, when we switch over to the employee side, you always want to make sure to verify and test that the email that you've entered is correct. And you always want to check mobile user when you're creating your profile for your individual employees. Users must also be added as employees if they provide care. And you also want to keep your employee files current so that any individuals that come and go, make sure that you get them added, but as they leave, make sure that they get removed from the profile as well. The mobile user option is especially important for providers who want to use SanData Mobile Connect. Using mobile user enables those individuals to log in using SanData Mobile Connect. So let's talk about some broader and common EVV problems. And again, a lot of this material will be important for both SanData users as well as alternative vendor users. So we're going to start by talking about telephonic visit verification. TVV is intended for use from the phone associated with the client's file. You should really only use TVV when SanData Mobile Connect is not available. And again, that's a universal rule for alternative vendor users as well. We expect that alternative vendors provide both telephonic visit verification as well as mobile visit verification. And you really only want to use telephonic visit verification if mobile visit verification is unavailable. You only use TVV from the client assigned phone number. So that's really critical. If you're using TVV, the only way it will work is if you're using the phone number or one of the phone numbers that's attached to the client's profile. You can't just use your phone. You have to use a phone number that's associated with the client. Now, a question might come up. What if a member doesn't have a landline? Can we use their cell phone? Yes, the phone number can be a cell phone or it can be a landline. Let's talk about altering EVV records for a second. Records with errors are considered incomplete, and they must be corrected so that they show up as verified prior to billing. And a good example of this, getting back to what we previously talked about a service location, if you happen to be providing services to a member in an alternative location other than their home, and that location is not part of that member's profile, you'll get an error with that EVV record saying it's incomplete because it doesn't see it's not validating the member's location correctly. So you would have to log into your system, verify and accept that this is actually accurate information, sign off on it, and the record will become verified, assuming there are no other errors to be corrected. Now, once your record is considered verified, it should not be altered unless there's an error in the data. So some common examples. If an employee forgot to punch in and punched in later, or if the wrong client is listed as the client that received the service, those are key issues that need to be corrected and should be altered. But if you're changing a valid, complete, and correct record, that's creating a false record, and you don't want to do that. So, for instance, if you clock in and clock out maybe a couple minutes after noon and you clock out 5 minutes after 1, you do not want to alter that record so that it starts at 12 and ends at 1. That is a false record. You should really be using the time where you're clocking in and using the time when you're clocking out. So how do we prevent exceptions? We don't want agencies to have to log in and clear a whole bunch of exceptions. There's no need for that. So key tips, make sure that you're providing employee education. They understand how to log in, collect the data, log in and log out. You want to enter all visits that are missing from the SAN data aggregator, and you want to ensure that you've got supporting documentation that's retained for no less than 7 years from the dates of service. You want to review all your EVV records for span dates to ensure that there are no exceptions remain on the EVV record. And you also want to make sure that only supported EVV records should be billed. So let's get into some specific problems that you might be seeing. Now is a really good time to have this conversation with the hard claims edits being active for personal care services. You are now seeing explanation of benefit 951, 952 that is actively denying services for one of these reasons. So if you happen to see a claim detail that shows 951, you might want to ask yourself some questions. Are you reviewing the SAN data aggregator to ensure that there are verified records for the dates of service on your claim? If you're using an alternative vendor, did you bill after your vendor submitted the records to the aggregator? Is your vendor up to date on the technical specifications? And did you also select the correct service to be billed against the specific EVV record? On the flip side, if you see 952, are you billing at or below the number of units reflected on the EVV record or records, especially if that billing was over a period of time? And we'll look at a couple examples for each one of these issues. The issue number one is a mismatch between the EVV record amount and the units billed on the claim, and this is due to the previously mentioned issue of incomplete records. If you look on the screenshot, you'll notice that the number of units that is billed on this claim was 333. If you look in the SAN data aggregator for the same member during the same time period, that member only had 130.75 verified units. And this is because the remainder of those units had issues related to either the employee forgot to clock out at the end of the visit, they forgot to include the member's information, they forgot to include the service information, or a number of other reasons that consider the record to be incomplete. So the solution to this is, as an agency, make sure that you're reviewing the SAN data aggregator and clearing any exceptions and record and unit amounts prior to billing. This second tip is very close to the first one, but instead of incomplete records, there's simply a mismatch of unsupported units. The screenshot on the left-hand side of the screen is showing you in the SAN data aggregator a verified record of 20 units of a particular service being performed. And on the right-hand side, the claim is showing 32 units being billed. For one reason or another, whether the remainder of the records weren't captured because on this date of service, or if there were exceptions that needed to be cleared, there's a mismatch between the amount of units being billed compared to the number of units captured on the EVV record. So again, make sure to clear any exceptions and verify that you've got the correct record and unit amounts prior to billing. This third example is a mismatch between the EVV record amount and the units billed on the claim when they extend beyond the calendar month. In this example, you can see a claim that was performed for services between June 26th and July 7th. The EVV activity will only match during the same calendar month being billed. So in order to get around this, you want to stay within the same calendar month when you're billing. In this case, the provider could break this up into two claims between the end of June 2022 and the beginning of July 2022. This fourth issue is a particular concern for our alternative vendor users. And this is around EVV record updates being performed after the claim has been submitted for payment. The screenshot on your left shows that a claim was submitted on July 20th of 2022. When you look at the SAN data aggregator for the same member, same data service, you will find records that are verified that were actually submitted into the aggregator on July 25th. When a provider goes to bill for their services, it's going to look for EVV activity as of that date and time. So if your vendor happens to submit records a day or 2 days or a week later, as of this moment, it will not be able to look for those records again unless you go back to resubmit your claims. So EVV activity needs to be posted into the aggregator prior to billing, and you want to ensure that your alternative vendor is uploading data on a regular basis, getting into a routine of getting that data into the aggregator as close to real time as possible. This next issue is a little bit of a lesser concern at this point. I think most providers have gotten through this, but it's still a valid concern that providers should be aware of. And that's selecting the incorrect service compared to what's being billed on the claim. The claim on the left is being billed as RH10, which is residential habilitation 35 or less hours. The EVV record chosen is actually RH20, which is over 35 hours. It might be vice versa, actually, compared to these screenshots. The important thing to remember is the service that's selected on the record does not match up correctly to the service that's being billed. And this could be because of technical specifications being followed. It could just be a slip of the employee not selecting the correct service. You want to verify that your caregivers are selecting the right service and that your alternative vendors is following the technical specifications for the service identifications. This will be key as well, especially for home health services users, as well as those when we move into the Indiana Pathways for Aging program. Because as we spoke about earlier, when you're adding members into an EVV profile, you will need to select the correct payer. You'll need to know which MCE or Gainwell is responsible for claims payment for that particular person. And that is key to make sure that you're lining up to the SAN data aggregator correctly. This other claims tip is really more of an observation and something for providers to be mindful of moving forward. And that's around high numbers of manual records. We haven't talked about manual records on this call today, but it is considered the third last resort option for providers to capture EVV data. And this just means simply that somebody is logging in on behalf of the provider agency and creating an EVV record, creating all the details for a verified EVV record visit without using telephonic or mobile visit verification. And we want to emphasize that this is okay as an emergency basis or as a last means effort of capturing the data. Providers should not be capturing all of their records manually, and it defeats the purpose of electronic visit verification. So we really emphasize that providers should only be using manual records in an emergency basis and not as a regular activity. And I think our final tip is really the most obvious tip of all. If there are no EVV records found in the aggregator, they don't exist. When you go to bill, none of that activity will link up correctly. So whether that's an issue with the employees capturing the data or whether it's an issue with an alternative vendor uploading the data, if you don't see it within the SAN data aggregator, we won't see it for claims processing purposes. So you need to verify with your vendors that you're submitting your records, and you also need to verify with your direct care workers that they are capturing records appropriately. So what's our overall message with all these claims tips? You really, as an agency, need to review your EVV activity prior to billing. Understand the reports that are available within the SAN data aggregator and all the functionality to help you be successful before you go to bill for services. And how can you be successful? We've got a variety of means that we'll talk about here. You have access to the SAN data Zendesk, which provides short and easy to understand video instructions for both the SAN data portal, which is for state-sponsored EVV users, as well as the SAN data aggregator, which everybody uses. You can sign up with your email, and within Zendesk, you have the option to log tickets and track existing tickets. If you happen to have technical issues that you need further assistance from SAN data from, you're able to use SAN data Zendesk in order to track those tickets. When you log into the EVV portal, you also have access to an online manual right there within the portal. And this is a little bit of an outdated screenshot, but it should give you an idea of the written material that's available from SAN data that guides you through how to add employees, how to capture visits, how to modify services, how to run reports. All of that will be detailed through resources that are available through SAN data. Now I want to talk through some additional pitfalls and some further information. And again, these are high-level issues that could be affecting all providers. So one issue that we've seen from providers are those agencies that have multiple IHCP provider IDs. So if you're a SAN data portal user, each one of those IHCP provider IDs for each of your enrolled locations requiring EVV reported must be individually given to the state. So if you happen to have, if you're a personal care services agency or a home health agency for that matter, that provides services out of multiple locations, you want to make sure that each one of those locations has its own separate welcome kit and separate identity for our EVV system. And the same thing goes if you're using an alternative vendor. If you're in that same situation and you've got multiple agency IDs, you want to include each one of those provider IDs in your request for testing credentials. This is especially important if you're a home health agency who also performs personal services. You will have two separate provider IDs, even if it's the same location. You're going to need a welcome kit for each one of those IDs so that when we capture EVV records, we get them lined up to the correct enrollment. If you go about submitting claims and your claim is adjusted or voided, key tip to remember is that it does not touch the EVV record. So if you happen to you have verified activity, it's in good shape, but you need to make some kind of a change to the claim or you need to void that claim out and replace it with a new claim, the EVV activity is still there. So don't feel like if you void out a claim, you need to go back to create new manual records in order to get that EVV activity back. It's still going to be there within the aggregator. A new claim will continue to look for the same EVV record. Now, what happens if we have a retroactive notice of action or prior authorization? The information on the NOA or the prior authorization must be entered on the client's profile. And this is a case where the state will sanction providers to create manual EVV records. If you provided services based upon retroactive NOAs or prior authorizations, you are allowed to go back to create manual records in order to comply with that requirement. We would strongly encourage you to continue to document in the notes section of your EVV platform that this is based upon a retroactive NOA or PA. How is billing impacted by EVV implementation? The key message to remember here is that billing policies have not changed, and neither has IHCP policy on billing units and rounding rules with the implementation of EVV. Services should also only be billed after they are provided. And one important note, to minimize any issues with the EVV records, we require billing in increments of no greater than 1 month. And that really gets back to that previous point of staying within the calendar month. If you go extend beyond a calendar month, that's when you'll run into problems with the claims linking up with the EVV records correctly. Another common question we get is around tasks. And this is a supplemental feature of the SANDATA state sponsor solution as well as alternative vendor solutions. The EVV record is looking for service code and modifier combinations and not those individual tasks. So this is useful information. It's good information to have. It further clarifies exactly what you're doing with a person, but tasks will not impact the overall EVV record. So this is an optional field. And again, for alternative vendor users, task ID is an optional field to be included. How does EVV records work with overnight shifts? This can be a little complicated, but we'll try and keep it high level here. Employees should still clock in when they're arriving and clock out upon finishing the overnight shift. If you happen to run into this situation, you don't need to call in and call out before midnight to create 2 separate EVV records. The provider agency should continue to bill normally based upon the units being provided. And the key to remember about this, if you're providing overnight shifts, you can bill span dates so that if you start on the 1st of the month and it happens to go over to the 2nd of the month overnight, you should really bill date of service the 1st and the 2nd. And that way it's captured, the EVV records that were started on the 1st are going to be reflected correctly on that claim. How do I get my welcome kit if I'm a brand new provider or if I happen to change EVV vendors? If you're getting your welcome kit as a state sponsor solution user, you need to complete the EVV training, which is a self-paced training module. It's available on the Indiana Medicaid provider website. You then want to send an email to the email address that you see on your screen. You'll be including your provider ID for each IHCP enrolled location, as we talked about previously, and you'll include your certificate of completion. Now, how do you navigate SANDATA's customer care? There's a couple paths here, depending upon if you're a state sponsor solution user or if you're an alternative vendor user. If you're a state sponsor solution user, your first line is to call the IHCP help desk. Calling the number that you see on your screen, selecting option 5, that'll get you to the EVV specific call center. And they'll be able to help you out with password resets or with basic navigation of the SANDATA system. If you happen to run into a slightly more complicated issue and need SANDATA's actual assistance, the call center can help escalate your issue to SANDATA customer care through a warm handoff. Or you can also use the SANDATA Zendesk, as we previously talked about. If you happen to be an alternative vendor that gets into more technical and complicated issues that can't quite be addressed by SANDATA's initial lines customer care, we do offer a 3rd tier. Don't have direct access for providers, but if SANDATA determines that the issue needs more technical expertise, they can escalate those issues for that tier 3 support. If you're an alternative vendor user, we always emphasize that providers work with their vendor first to see if they can work out whatever issue might be coming up. And if they can't address that issue, we encourage the vendors and the providers to contact SANDATA through the IN Alt EVV inbox. If you're not getting a response from SANDATA customer care, our team wants to hear about that. and we'd ask you to send an email to the email address that you see on your screen and include your SANDATA customer care ticket number. One thing to remember about these communications, sometimes they can go to the spam folder, so make sure that if you're expecting a response from SANDATA customer care, check your spam folder just in the event it happened to make sure you don't miss any important communications from SANDATA. Now let's round this out with some specific questions for our alternative vendor users. How long should it take to receive my production credentials, and what is that process for alternative vendor users? If your vendor has already passed testing with an agency in Indiana, upon receipt of the request, those requests are usually processed within several days of receipt from SANDATA. Now, if you're alternatively working with a vendor that has not passed testing with an agency in Indiana, they do have to go through that full process with SANDATA. That really depends upon how long it takes for your vendor to complete the testing. And that really requires coordination between your agency, the vendor, and SANDATA. So it's tough to give an estimate of that for that. The vast majority of vendors have already passed testing with an agency in Indiana, but there are occasionally some vendors that brand new or vendors or providers want to use vendors that they've never used before that might not have completed testing. So just be aware of that. If you are in the process of requesting credentials from SANDATA for using an alternative vendor, your first step is to send an email to FSSA at the email address that you see on your screen. And all we're really going to do is verify that your particular vendor has passed testing with an agency already. And at that point, we'll respond back with a few additional questions and a quick template that we'd like you to fill out. And then you'll get your welcome kit from SANDATA. If you happen to be in the opposite boat where it's a vendor that hasn't passed testing yet, we'll have some additional steps for you. You'll get some communication from SANDATA. You'll get a survey that you need to complete. And then SANDATA will go back and forth with your vendor on creating and sending those testing credentials, as well as the testing certification checklist. Now, what should you do in the event that, as an agency, you are not seeing your visits in the SANDATA aggregator? The best place to go as a third-party user is to contact your vendor. Alert them that you're not seeing visits in the aggregator. And if they, upon review, see that they believe they are submitting visits and for some reason they're not being received, then you need to work with your vendor and open up a service ticket with SANDATA to get that reviewed. Before we get to any additional questions, let's round this out with some additional EVV resources that are available to our providers. We host an EVV webpage on the Indiana Medicaid provider website. That's under the Business Transactions tab. And this is going to be your key for all the policy around EVV, education materials, frequently asked questions, quick reference guides, lots of good material that's posted on this webpage. You can also find the EVV preparation guide, which is a little outdated at this point, but it still provides some good key information for providers that are just starting from scratch and need to understand where to look. This will give you key requirements, step-by-step guide for implementation, as well as contact information to help address problems. Now, as we conclude all these webinars, we like to emphasize all of the provider resources that are available to all of our providers. Providers have access to regional field consultants that are located throughout the state of Indiana, and those are the direct line support who can help you with billing questions and enrollment concerns, and just generally navigating the IHCP. We also make available a variety of provider reference materials, and that's really the written rules of the road describing how the IHCP implements its billing policies and other material on behalf of the IHCP. We also provide ongoing webinars like today's IHCP Live Town Hall as well as monthly updates on our monthly publication or weekly publications that we put out. Providers can keep up to date on all the IHCP happenings by registering for updates on the Indiana Medicaid provider website. If you scroll down, you'll find a little box. Just provide your email address. You'll be signed up to receive a weekly notification giving you all the ongoing bulletins and policy updates on behalf of the IHCP. If you're trying to resolve your questions, we've touched upon these email addresses and phone numbers before, but it's good to continue to emphasize them. First, you have access to our FSSA's direct EVV inbox, and that's really for policy-specific questions, or if you're getting started with an alternative vendor, that's going to be the best place to start. You also have access to INXIX EVV at gainwelltechnologies.com, and this is going to be a very widely utilized resource that gives you access to not just your welcome kit to start off the process, but also general EVV education, claims meetings, and issue resolution, as well as SAN Data Portal and aggregator assistance. Really a great one-stop shop to help you navigate EVV inside and out. You can also call the IHCP help desk at the phone number that you see on your screen, and they will provide technical assistance using the SAN Data state-sponsored solution. If you want to contact your provider relations field consultants, we've included a map as well as contact information for each one of those individuals. Again, they're regional, so they service a wide range of counties across the state. You can find this information on the Indiana Medicaid provider website as well. And with that, we'll take a quick pause and see if there are any additional questions related to EVV implementation. We had a question, will we have access to this presentation? So a recording of the previous presentation should be posted on the IHCP Live webpage, and I believe we've got a copy of the presentation itself uploaded as well. We'll double check that, but yes, we'll make this presentation available. Will there be a limit for manual entries? It's a great question. Right now, we have not set a standard or any kind of a limit around manual entries. What we have known, we believe this is an issue that CMS will be monitoring in the future. They'll be monitoring the percentage of overall records that are manual compared to mobile visit and telephonic visit verification. Some states have already set standards that they're watching providers for. Indiana has not set that standard. In our philosophy right now, the most important item is to make sure that providers are capturing this information, getting compliant with EVV, with the EVV requirement. So any details around manual visits and the number of manual visits, we can talk about that later, and we may set a standard later. But at this point, our philosophy is providers can and will use manual records, but we don't want them to be used as a regular means of capturing EVV data, because it goes against the purpose of electronic visit verification. I entered 2 questions in the Q&A. So we are concerned with the enforcement timelines for EVV for home health for an alternative vendor. Can you detail the timelines? We are pushing to have this completed by 1/1 because we think we have to start submitting GPS data by then. You are correct that as of 1/1/2024, we no longer have a good faith effort exemption for EVV services for home health. And this is a similar situation to what we ran into with on the personal care services side, that as of January 1st, it is a requirement for home health providers to be submitting EVV data. We will not be enforcing a hard claims edit either on the fee-for-service side or the managed care side immediately on January 1st. We will be pushing that out to sometime later in 2024. That being said, all claims activity for home health services starting on January 1st is subject to post-payment claims review and recoupment. And this is similar to the approach that we took on the personal care services side until we've turned on this hard claims edit. So we've allowed home health agencies to begin using EVV since about October or November of last year, and we made that process available. And a lot of home health agencies are already up and running and submitting records. If you're a home health agency who is not, you need to get going on this process. Any claims submitted after January 1st do need to be compliant with EVV requirements, or they're subject to post-payment review. If we miss signatures for shifts, do we need to have paper copies of signatures on file? No. So for EVV purposes, if you're referring to the member signature, this is an optional field. We highly encourage members to sign either providing a written signature or a verbal signature, but due to stakeholder feedback, we have made this an optional field. If you don't capture the member signature, you don't need to include any kind of a paper copy of that. And as far as a signature on the employee end, there is no signature requirement on the employee end. The EVV record acts as the signature. Our vendor Epic has passed testing with another agency. I'm in the middle of testing with my agency who uses the same Epic EMR. Do I need to continue testing or can I get approved without additional testing? If your vendor has completed testing with another agency, I would go ahead and send an email to the FSSA EVV inbox alerting them that your vendor has passed testing. We'll get that information over to SanData. You should be able to get your welcome kit quickly, knowing that your vendor has completed testing. If we want to start using Alt EVV, do we need to send first the request to INFSSA, or the request can also come from the vendor? The request can come from either the vendor or the provider, but the first step that it does need to go to FSSA, the EVV inbox. That way we'll verify that this is a vendor that's already passed testing, and we'll ask a few other pieces of information and get that request submitted to SanData for you. If we make a mistake when submitting a claim or a mistake isn't captured prior to billing, can we still edit the claim or fix the EVV record and resubmit? Yes, you can. If there's an issue with the EVV record, or if there's an issue on the claim side, let's talk about the EVV record first. If you happen to if it's an incomplete record and it needs to be verified, something needs to be corrected, go ahead and log in, make sure you make those corrections, and then you can go about rebilling. We don't want you to edit a verified record if it is verified, unless there truly was something incorrect about the record. We don't want those to be touched. But the flip side goes for a claim as well. If you notice that everything on the EVV record looks correct, but you happen to build too many units or you build the wrong service, you can go back within the timely filing limit, make a correction to that claim, and get it paid. I have an employee that regularly experiences issues clocking in and clocking out at a particular client's home via the mobile app. I'm having trouble providing solutions for this. Is this a common problem? How can I fix her with this? If so, couple things to remember. If the employee's having issues with the application, the alternative way of collecting EVV data is through telephonic visit verification. If you run into a situation where the member also doesn't have a telephone available and you're still having access with the mobile visit verification, some vendors do offer the option of using fixed visit verification. I don't know how many alternative vendors actually provide that option, but you may have a vendor that does give you that option, and we can collect that data within the aggregator. If you're working with an alternative vendor or even SANdata for that matter, and something's wrong with the app or it's not working as functioned, we would definitely encourage you to contact that vendor's customer service to alert them to the issue and work through it. And if you use SANdata, again, it looks like if you're using SANdata, if you're running into an issue with the app, contact the IHCP help desk. They can work with you first to see if they can address the issue. And if they're not able to, they can help escalate it to SANdata, their tier 2 support for further assistance. If a person clocks in and right back out 1 minute on the clock in error, thinking they had it clocked in on time, can we then create a second schedule to capture the rest of the schedule? So what I would say in that is there will be a record of 1 minute of activity. What you'll do is you'll go into the SANdata aggregator and you'll actually omit that record to make it clear that this was a mistake. The employee should go ahead and clock back in, start a new visit, continue to provide services, and then clock out from there. So you'll have 2 records, one of which will be a very short 1 minute visit. Just click omit to make sure that that visit is cleared out. And then the second visit should be good to go. What would be the best way to edit a verified visit in SANdata? For example, if the visit is verified under the incorrect service code. I believe the individual who has administrative rights to the provider's agent, the provider's account, can still go in and select the correct service if indeed the service was incorrect. And that is a valid reason why a verified record could be altered. The only person or group of individuals who'd be able to do that, though, are the individuals who have that administrative high-level access to the agency's SANdata account. If we submit billing bi-weekly with our pay period and the pay period crossing the first of the month, are you saying that we should bill the end of the month? For instance, our current pay period is 11/26 to 12/9. Is it best to bill November in November? Yes, it is. It is the best practice to bill within the calendar month to make sure that the linkage between what you're billing on your claim, the SANdata system, matches correctly. I have an individual that we bill for hourly, and they live in a 24-hour setting. They are considered to be a 24-hour individual. Does this individual ever require EVV records to be submitted? I think I'm kind of hard to speculate on specific instances like this. I think what we will say is if you have individuals who are receiving 24 hours, they are residing in a 24-hour congregate setting, we've issued guidance, specific billing guidance that providers should use to bill for those services, and that will avoid EVV records. As far as this individual, whether they are subject to EVV or not, it's really that's a determination by the provider based upon the services that you're rendering. We would also say make sure that you have supporting documentation that if you're not capturing any EVV activity, in the event of any audit down the road, you know that this person was receiving services in a 24-hour congregate setting, and that would support your claim. Can we have 2 scheduled visits for client? I have some clients, they get service early in the morning for breakfast time, and then the caregiver comes back for lunch. 2 scheduled shifts. Yes, you can. So what would happen here? Person would clock in at the beginning of the breakfast shift, clock out at the end of their breakfast shift. They then would clock back in the afternoon shift and clock back out when they're done. When you go to bill, you're going to have 2 separate records for that specific date, and you'll have a number of units within SANData's aggregator that will add up to show your agency provided this number of cumulative units of a particular service on that day. You can go and bill for that number of units when you go to bill for services, and you can have those 2 separate visits. What does it mean when an EVV is denied due to call time is too early when the time is accurate? I'm not sure from House of Care what it means when an EVV is denied due to the call time is too early when the time is accurate. If the time is accurate, then that's good. It seems like the issue might be something different from the time. I think you might have to expand a little bit on that question. What's the difference between verified and processed? Why does it affect billing? Verified means that all the required elements on an EVV record are visible. We know the date, the time, the location, person receiving services, person providing services, all the requirements of an EVV record. Those are verified. Processed means that once you've submitted claims, you log into the SANData aggregator, and if those records that you've captured and are verified have successfully matched up with claims, those EVV records become processed. And that's the gold standard. That's what you're looking for. That's telling you, your agency, that you're essentially getting credit for all of your EVV activity. If you continue to have records that remain verified and you're billing for those same services, there's some kind of a mismatch, and we need to investigate that. And that would be an example of contacting either the INXIX email address, the IHCP call center, or even the EVV FSSA inbox. And we can investigate exactly why that linkage isn't taking place. Can you repeat the email address? I need to ask FSSA to notify SANData that my vendor has already been verified and I don't have to continue testing with SANData. The email address is evv@fssa.in.gov. We have a situation of an overnight crossing midnight, as well as month end and a new month rejecting. Are you saying to omit those in SANData and create a manual visit to push through? Why don't you could send that to the EVV inbox. We can take a second look at that. Again, to get into specifics, I think it better for the team to take a look at the specific record, the specific claim, and we can give you feedback. Got time for maybe, let's do this one last one. Can you clarify the answer to an individual who lives alone in a 24/7 setting and is billed hourly? Would this individual not require EVV data? Again, without getting into the specifics, we defer to providers as far as 24/7 congregate settings. we posted billing guidance out there about how providers can go about billing said services in 24-hour congregate settings. We defer to providers as far as supporting that is indeed the case and that they're not providing EVV support for those individuals. So as long as that's the case and you document that provider is or a individual is receiving services in this 24-hour congregate setting, follow the billing guidance, make sure you document supporting or maintain documentation supporting that. I think we'll take this last question. Does the IHCP portal secure correspondence get looked at by someone? I've sent 2 messages about 2 weeks ago. I haven't heard anything. I was just curious. Yes, it does. So that does, our vendor at Gainwell Technologies does maintain that secure correspondence feature. They do respond to messages. If you're not receiving feedback on a specific secure correspondence, you can go ahead and reach out directly to the state. I don't think we've provided the OMPP provider relations inbox. If one of the team members wants to put that in the chat, be happy to reach out to the team and we can correspond with Gainwell to look to investigate if you're having an issue getting a response from a secure correspondence. Okay, no more questions. I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you everybody again for logging on and participating in our IHCP Live EVV Town Hall. We may do this again early in 2024. We'll play it by ear. Again, keep an eye out for our publications in the near future. We'll continue to talk through enhancements to this process, as well as a firmed up timeline for when we will turn on the hard edits for the foreseeable future. So until that time, we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care, and thanks for listening.